The unspoken heir. Liam Thorne had spent his entire life building walls. No one could scale. As CEO of one of Europe's largest medical tech firms, he was the definition of composure, precision, and emotional inaccessibility. Every decision he made was calculated. Every word he uttered measured. He believed in control above all else, and that belief had made him unimaginably successful. He was admired by colleagues, envied by competitors, and feared by anyone who dared challenge him. Yet he wasn't open, especially when it came to love, vulnerability, or the very idea of family. His wife, Chloe, had always seen beyond that carefully polished facade. When they met, she was a rising PR consultant, hired for a temporary project at his firm. She didn't fall for his power or his wealth. What drew her were the glimmers of something buried beneath the surface, a deep sadness, a longing he never spoke of. Against her better judgment, she fell in love with him quickly, and to her surprise, he let her in. At least, he let her in enough to believe she meant something. They married after just 6 months. The wedding was small, elegant, and free of the kind of drama Liam avoided like a disease. Chloe glowed with hope, dreaming of a home filled with warmth, laughter, and eventually, children. Liam never spoke of children. At first, he didn't reject the idea, but he didn't embrace it either. Chloe assumed it was fear or uncertainty, something time and love would heal. She discovered she was pregnant on a rainy Monday morning, completely alone in the bathroom, holding a test in her trembling hands. The news was overwhelming, beautiful, terrifying, life-changing. Her first instinct was joy. Her second was fear. Not for herself, but for how Liam would react. She rehearsed 1,000 ways to tell him, imagined a dozen possible outcomes, but none prepared her for what he said one evening at dinner, before she'd uttered a word. "I never want children," he said, without looking up from his plate. His voice was quiet, his tone definitive. "I've seen what they do to people, the sacrifice, the chaos. I don't want that kind of life, ever." Chloe felt the air leave her lungs. Her fork clattered onto her plate. He didn't even flinch. The words hung between them like a steel curtain. She tried to speak, to argue, to find something to say that would bridge the gap between her and the man she thought she knew. But nothing came out. Her hands cradled her still flat belly beneath the table as her heart silently shattered inside her chest. She didn't sleep that night. She stared at the ceiling of their immaculate penthouse, listening to the city outside, the sound of her future collapsing. By dawn, she knew what she had to do. She wouldn't force him into fatherhood, wouldn't beg for love, or fight for a space in a life where she was clearly no longer welcome, now that the truth was in her heart. So the next morning, while he was at work, she packed one suitcase. She left behind the luxury, the silence, the cold marble of their shared world. She didn't leave a letter. She didn't send a text. She simply vanished. She didn't know what the next chapter would hold, only that she wouldn't live in fear of someone else's rejection. She carried 2 lives within her, twins, though she didn't know it yet, and they deserved a life where they were wanted. As she watched the London skyline disappear from the back window of a taxi heading out of the city, Chloe made a silent vow. Even if she had to do it alone, her children would know love, and they would never hear the words, "I never want you," from the lips of the person who was supposed to protect them most. Was Chloe's decision brave or reckless? What would you have done in her place? Share your opinion in the comments below. Chloe didn't look back as the taxi whisked her away from the life she had once built with Liam. She rested her forehead against the cool window, the city's pulse fading behind her, replaced by open roads and a sky that seemed too vast for her current state of mind. She didn't cry. Not then. Grief settled in her chest like a stone, heavy and unmoving, but she had no energy left for tears. There was only one priority now, keeping herself and the lives within her safe. At least, that's what she believed, until her first ultrasound a week later at a modest women's clinic on the outskirts of a quiet town in the Scottish Highlands. Twins. She stared at the screen in disbelief, the gentle smiles of the technician softening the blow of those two simple syllables. 2 heartbeats, strong and steady, pulsed from the monitor like a song she hadn't expected to hear. Chloe's throat tightened, and this time, the tears did come. Not from fear, not exactly. More from awe, and the overwhelming realization that this journey would be even harder than she had thought. But she wouldn't turn back. She wouldn't run. She rented a small cottage on the edge of town, not far from a nature reserve where the air always smelled of pine and damp earth. It was a fixer-upper, creaky floors, peeling paint, and a temperamental water heater. But it was hers. For the first time in years, she had a space that felt like it could become home. She found remote work in marketing and content writing, freelancing for small brands and local businesses. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was far from what she was used to, but it kept her afloat. As her belly swelled, so did her resilience. She decorated the girls' nursery herself, painting the walls a soft sage green, sewing tiny curtains, and placing 2 cribs side by side. Clara, her childhood best friend who had moved to the area a few years earlier, showed up almost daily with groceries, advice, and open arms. Chloe hadn't told her everything, only that the father was out of the picture, and it was for the best. Clara didn't press for details. She simply stayed, and that made all the difference. The pregnancy was difficult. There were days Chloe couldn't move without pain. Nights the weight of her growing body kept her awake, and mornings the nausea returned, despite being well into her 2nd trimester. Still, she bore it with a quiet kind of strength, the kind that wasn't dramatic or loud, but steady, patient, and filled with silent determination. The girls arrived on a rainy late spring afternoon, just after a lightning storm had swept through the valley. The labor was long, brutal, and complicated, but Chloe never lost her resolve. When Sophia was placed in her arms, eyes wide open and wriggling with a tuft of soft brown hair, Chloe completely broke down. And when Olivia followed 2 minutes later, identical to her sister, but with a slightly more stubborn cry, she felt something within her finally settle. They were beautiful. They had Liam's eyes, bright green, sharp, unmistakable, but none of his distance. Their tiny fingers curled tightly around hers, their breaths light as whispers, and for the first time since she left London, Chloe felt whole. The months that followed were both a blur and a miracle. The girls grew quickly, always close to each other, always seeking each other out in sleep, as if afraid to be apart for even a moment. Chloe learned to survive on 2 hours of sleep, to balance one crying baby on her hip while feeding the other, to function while exhausted, worried, and completely in love. There were moments when doubt crept in, late at night, usually, when the girls were finally asleep and the silence in the house felt deafening. She'd lie awake and wonder if she had done the right thing, if she had stolen something from them by choosing to leave. But then she would remember Liam's voice, so cold and certain, saying, "I never want children," and her heart would clench again. He hadn't been ready. He hadn't wanted them, and she couldn't raise them in a world where they were seen as burdens. Still, sometimes she'd catch a glimpse of Sophia's smile or Olivia's head tilt and feel her breath catch. They were his in so many ways, yet they were entirely hers. That paradox rode with her every day. 3 years passed like this. The girls were vibrant, intelligent, mischievous, and endlessly curious. They loved animals, music, and helping their mom cook, though helping usually meant making a mess. Chloe gave them everything she had, and though she still carried the scars of what had happened, she carried herself with a grace that only comes from surviving the hardest things and still choosing joy. She didn't know that everything was about to change again. That fate had a way of rewriting stories when you least expect it. That sometimes the person you least expect to return is the one you could never truly get over. But for now, she allowed herself to live in the moment, unaware the man who had once said never was just days away from discovering exactly what he had left behind. Liam Thorne sat at his desk overlooking the London skyline, but the view that once filled him with pride now felt empty. His days had become monotonous, consumed by meetings, numbers, boardrooms, and accolades that no longer brought him satisfaction. 3 years had passed since Chloe left, and though he never said it aloud, he had never stopped thinking about her. At first, he was furious. She had vanished without a word, no goodbye, leaving him to assume it was all over because of his words. And perhaps that was true. Perhaps it was exactly because of what he had said, or worse, what he hadn't said. He had always been clear, or so he told himself. He didn't want children. He didn't want the chaos or the loss of control. But in her silence, in her sudden absence, there had been something more. Something he hadn't been able to admit to anyone, not even himself. That he missed her. That he had built his world so carefully to keep love out, and when it finally slipped through the cracks, he didn't know how to hold on to it. So he let her go without a fight, assuming she'd come back, assuming she needed space. But space turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And she never returned. For years, he buried himself in work, convincing himself that success would appease the ache. He dated briefly, smart, ambitious women who understood his world, but none of them looked at him the way Chloe did. None of them made the silence feel safe. With Chloe, even stillness held meaning. With everyone else, it was simply empty. One night, leaving a charity gala he'd sponsored, he saw a woman in the crowd with long brown hair and a familiar posture. For an instant, he thought it was her. His heart stuttered, unprepared for the flood of emotion that followed. It wasn't her, of course, but that single moment unraveled something within him. That night, he poured himself a drink and stood at the edge of his penthouse apartment, looking at the skyline. The silence felt louder than ever. He thought of her laugh, the way she bit her lip when she was nervous, the way she closed her eyes when he hugged her, as if to remember every second. He thought of the things he had never said. And then, for the first time, he wondered. What if she hadn't left him? What if she had left because of something else? A single phrase came to mind. I never want children. He had said it so casually, unaware of what she carried within her at that moment. A slow dread bloomed in his chest. He didn't know if it was too late. He didn't know if she had moved on, if she was somewhere married or far away or happy without him. But suddenly, he needed to know. He hired a private investigator, not the kind that left traces or asked questions. He wanted quiet, precise answers. It took less than 2 weeks. The first photos almost took his breath away. Chloe in a small town in the Scottish Highlands, walking along a park path with 2 small girls, identical, both around 3 years old. They had her brown hair, but their eyes were unmistakably his. Green, bright, and wide with curiosity. One was laughing, the other pointing at a bird in the sky. Chloe held both of their hands. Liam dropped the file to the floor and sat down, stunned. She had children, not just one, but two. Twins. He stared at their faces, unable to look away. Emotions hit him all at once. Shock, guilt, awe, fear, and something deeper. Regret. Regret for not asking, for not searching. That for 3 years, while he built empires, his daughters had been learning to walk, talk, laugh, and live without him. He booked a flight that very night. No calls, no emails, just a plane ticket, a suitcase, and the address that would lead him face to face with the life he never expected to find. He didn't know what Chloe would say. He didn't know if the girls would even look at him. But none of that mattered anymore. He needed to see them, to understand, to face the cost of his silence. For the first time in his life, Liam Thorne had no plan. Just one question he could no longer ignore. What if love was the only thing he should have fought for? Do you think Liam has a right to a second chance? Or is his initial selfishness unforgivable? Leave us your opinion in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story. The flight to the Scottish Highlands felt like a journey back in time. Liam sat by the window, his reflection staring back at him from the glass, unfamiliar and uncertain. He had been to thousands of destinations in his life, closed multi-million-dollar deals, walked global stages, but he had never felt this kind of anxiety in his chest. There was no meeting agenda, no script, no assistant beside him feeding him statistics. There was only the possibility of a confrontation he couldn't prepare for, and the unsettling knowledge that 3 years had passed. Years that belonged not only to Chloe, but to the daughters he had never held, never kissed, never even named. He arrived in the small town mid-morning, the air crisp and the streets quiet. It was nothing like the world he came from. No skyscrapers, no honking, no hurried pace. Just trees lining narrow roads and people who nodded as they passed. He found the park first, the one from the photos. It was modest, surrounded by tall pines, with a small playground and a path that wound around a pond. He didn't approach it first. He sat in his rental car, his hands clenched on the steering wheel as he watched a mother and her 2 daughters near the swings. Chloe hadn't changed much. Her hair was longer, pulled into a simple braid, her clothes soft and practical, her face more mature, but still beautiful in a way that hurt his heart. The girls ran circles around her, one tripping and falling into her arms, the other pointing at ducks with a joy so vibrant Liam had to look away. He felt something crack open inside him, something he had locked away so long he didn't even remember the sound. He waited until the girls were distracted, chasing each other towards the grassy patch, before getting out and walking towards her. Chloe looked up. Her eyes met his, and for a second, everything else disappeared. There was no greeting, no smile, just shock, cold and immediate. She stood up slowly, as if unsure whether she was dreaming or seeing a ghost. Her posture stiffened. Her hands went instinctively to her sides, protectively seeking out the girls. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. The tone wasn't angry, not yet, but laced with pain barely hidden beneath the surface. "I had to see you," he replied softly. "I had to see them." Her expression wavered, and a storm passed through her eyes. "Now," she said. "After 3 years?" Liam stepped closer, but stopped a respectful distance away. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear, Chloe, I didn't know you were pregnant. I thought you left because of what I said. I thought it was over." "It was over," she snapped, and then lowered her voice as the girls turned to look at them. "You said you never wanted children. I was already carrying them inside me when you looked me in the eye and told me they were the last thing you'd ever want. I couldn't stay after that. I know, he said, and I hate myself for it. She blinked, surprised by the rawness in his voice. For a moment, the armor she wore cracked. He saw her hurt, but also her strength. She had built a life here, without him. A life that didn't include his name, his money, or his mistakes. The girls ran towards her, laughing. One of them, Sophia, stopped and looked at Liam with wide green eyes. She tilted her head, curious. "Mommy, who's he?" she asked. Chloe's breath caught. Her eyes searched Liam's face for a sign, a cue, but none came. She knelt beside Sophia and brushed a curl from her cheek. "He's someone I used to know," she said slowly. Olivia toddled over and stood next to her sister, clutching her twin's hand. Liam knelt too, ignoring the expensive suit, the dirt from the grass, the tremor in his hands. "My name is Liam," he said softly. "It's nice to meet you girls." Sophia squinted, thoughtful in that serious way only children can be. "Do you live here?" "No," he said, "but I came a very long way just to see you." Olivia whispered something in Sophia's ear, and the two girls giggled. Then, without warning, Olivia reached out and touched his tie. "It's shiny," she said, and then looked at Chloe as if seeking permission. Chloe didn't speak, but she didn't stop them either. Liam stood up and looked at her. "I'm not here to take anything away," he said. "I just want to get to know them. I know I don't deserve it, but I had to try." She was silent for a long time. Then, without meeting his eyes, she said, "We come here every afternoon." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. But it was a beginning. Liam watched as she took the girls' hands and led them down the path, just as he had seen in those photos. But this time, he wasn't just observing. This time, he was walking behind them, with hope in his heart and the first steps of a second chance beneath his feet. Liam returned to the park the next day, unsure if he'd see them again. He arrived early, his heart heavy with anticipation and self-reproach. The small town moved slowly, and yet the minutes dragged like hours as he sat on the same bench near the swings where he'd first seen them. He wasn't used to waiting. In his world, things happened when he commanded them. But now, none of that mattered. He couldn't buy forgiveness, couldn't rush healing, couldn't force Chloe to open the door he had once slammed shut with 7 careless words. All he could do was show up. And then, just as the wind picked up and a few clouds drifted across the sun, he saw them. Chloe walked hand in hand with Sophia and Olivia, their tiny feet moving with an uneven rhythm as they skipped down the path towards the playground. The girls saw him first and gave small, uncertain smiles. Chloe hesitated before offering a small nod, the kind of gesture that didn't say she was ready to talk, but didn't tell him to leave either. It was enough. He stood up, dusted off his coat, and met them halfway. The girls immediately darted towards the swings, giggling and gently pushing each other as Chloe leaned against the wooden fence, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Liam stood beside her, keeping just enough distance to respect unspoken boundaries. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The only sounds were the girls' laughter and the distant creak of the swings. Finally, Chloe spoke, her voice measured and steady. "You won't be staying long, will you?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I didn't come with a plan. I just knew I couldn't live another day without knowing them, without knowing you were all okay." She turned to him slowly, her eyes unreadable. "We've been more than okay. We've been surviving." "I believe it," he said, "and I can see it. You're doing wonderfully with them. I would never want to undo what you've built." "But you still want to be a part of it now?" she asked quietly. "After all this time?" Liam exhaled slowly. "Yes, not to disrupt it, not to rewrite it. I just want to belong to it, if there's space." Chloe looked back at the girls, her jaw tightening slightly. They don't know who you are." "I know," he replied, "and I'm not asking you to explain it today. I'd like to earn it. Whatever it is." She nodded, but her face remained a mask. Then, unexpectedly, she walked to the bench and sat down. Liam followed, cautiously. For the first time in years, they sat side by side in a silence that wasn't cutting or painful, just fragile. She began to tell him about the girls, not like a mother defending her choices, but like someone who had spent 3 years documenting every moment in her heart. She told him how Sophia had a stubborn streak a mile wide, but cried during Disney movies, and how Olivia was always the first to comfort her sister when she fell. She shared how they loved blueberries, hated naps, and adored their preschool teacher, Miss Johnson. As she spoke, Liam listened as if her words were treasure. He clung to every detail, absorbing a world he never knew he'd been missing. Then, the girls ran over to them, asking for snacks, which Chloe had packed in a small B-shaped cooler. Without hesitation, she handed Liam one of the containers and allowed him to pass it to Olivia. The little girl accepted it without question, sitting at his feet and eating apple slices as if she'd known him her whole life. It was the smallest moment, but to Liam, it was monumental. He looked at Olivia, then at Chloe, and felt something shift inside him. Not guilt, not panic, but something slower and more powerful. It was the understanding that he wanted to show up not just for a moment, but for every moment. That afternoon, after Chloe and the girls had gone home, Liam didn't return to his hotel. He drove aimlessly around the town for over an hour, watching the sun dip behind the hills, casting a golden light over old farmhouses and quiet streets. He stopped outside a small bookstore and sat in the car, overwhelmed. His life had been clean, structured, sterile, and it had left him empty. Here, in a town where nothing was perfect, where 2 little girls called for their mother and shared apple slices without pretense, he had finally found something real. He knew this wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was a beginning, and for the first time in his adult life, Liam Thorne wanted to be part of something messy, complicated, and true. Not as a guest, but as a father, as the man he should have been all along. Do you think this new relationship between Liam and the girls can overcome the past? Can Chloe fully trust him? Leave your comment and subscribe for the next part of this emotional story. Summer began to soften the edges of the small Scottish Highlands town, bathing it in golden light and long, quiet evenings. Liam had extended his stay, turning days into weeks without setting a departure date. He rented a small cottage not far from Chloe's, nothing extravagant, just a simple place with big windows and a porch that looked out onto the trees. It was the first home he had chosen for reasons not rooted in status or convenience. Each morning, he woke early and walked the long trail behind the cottages, sometimes crossing paths with Chloe and the girls on their way to the park. They had a rhythm now, not exactly a routine, but something close. Sophia and Olivia had begun asking more questions. They wanted to know why Liam always came to the park, why he remembered which juices they liked, why he sometimes looked at them as if memorizing their faces. Chloe hadn't told them the truth yet, but she knew that moment was approaching. And as she watched Liam each day, how he knelt beside them in the grass, how he listened, truly listened, to their long stories, she began to believe he might be ready to hear it from their lips, not just her own. One afternoon, while the girls napped after a morning of hide-and-seek, Chloe invited Liam inside and sat him down at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee. Her expression was cautious, but not guarded. She'd been thinking about this moment for weeks. The question that had lingered within her wasn't whether he loved the girls. She could see that he did. It was whether he would still love them after the truth was spoken aloud, after he was no longer safe in implication or silence. "They're old enough to start understanding," she said carefully, wrapping her fingers around the warm mug. "They already sense there's something different about you." Liam nodded, his eyes steady. "I know. I've been waiting for you to tell me when the time was right." "I don't think there's a right time," she admitted, "but there is an honest one, and I think that time is now." They decided together that Chloe would tell them first, gently, in her own words. Liam would stay nearby, in the living room, in case they had questions or if they simply wanted to run into his arms without need for words. Neither of them knew how it would go. Neither of them pretended to. That afternoon, the girls sat on the rug in front of the fireplace, coloring with their usual intensity. Chloe sat with them, and slowly and lovingly told them a story about a man who had once loved their mother, but who hadn't quite understood love. She spoke of fear and growth, of mistakes and second chances. She told them that the man they had come to know, the one who helped build block castles and made funny voices while reading bedtime stories, was not just a friend. He was their father. The room fell silent. Crayons dropped to the floor. Olivia seemed confused, Sophia more curious than anything else. Chloe waited, her heart pounding, her breath caught in her chest. "Really?" Sophia asked, her tiny voice full of wonder, not pain. Chloe nodded slowly. "Yes, sweetie. He didn't know about you when you were born, but once he did, he came." Olivia blinked at her sister, then turned towards the doorway where Liam stood silently, barely breathing. "Is that why his eyes look like ours?" she asked. Liam stepped forward, kneeling beside them with more tenderness than Chloe had ever seen from him. "That's part of it," he said softly. "But mostly, it's because you're mine. You always have been." There were no dramatic tears, no cinematic embrace. But the girls moved towards him slowly, Sophia first, snuggling against his side, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Olivia followed moments later, leaning against his chest, quiet and wide-eyed. That night, Liam stayed for dinner. He helped clean up, read them a bedtime story, and kissed their tiny heads when Chloe tucked them in. They didn't call him Dad, not yet, but they called his name with more warmth, with more ownership. And for Liam, that was enough, for now. Later, when the house was silent, he sat on the porch with Chloe, a blanket over their laps, and a glass of wine in her hand. The stars above them glittered in a clear, perfect stillness. She didn't say much, just rested her head gently on his shoulder. "You're not the man I left," she whispered. "And I don't think I'm the same woman either." Liam didn't reply immediately. He simply took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "No," he finally said. "But perhaps that's the key. We had to break to become the people who could get this right." And for the first time, neither of them looked away. As summer gave way to early autumn, the small Scottish Highlands town began to transform under a soft, golden haze. Leaves turned amber and rust, days grew shorter, and Chloe's little cottage took on a new kind of warmth. It wasn't just the season. It was the feeling of something settling after years of imbalance. Liam had quietly become a part of their world, not as a visitor, not as a disruption, but as someone who belonged. The girls now waited for him each morning, rushing to the door when they saw his car arrive, arms outstretched, voices overlapping with eager stories and questions. They still called him Liam, but there was something different in the way they said his name now. It was tender, instinctive, filled with trust. It no longer held the distance of a stranger, but the rhythm of someone who had always been there, even if he hadn't been present at first. Liam's life in London felt like a distant echo. His assistant still sent emails and summaries. He had delegated most of his authority, and though his board of directors didn't understand why, he no longer cared to explain. For the first time, he lived not for quarterly profits or market share, but for moments that couldn't be measured. Pancake breakfasts where Olivia insisted on shaping hers like stars. Afternoons, helping Sophia build obstacle courses out of sofa cushions and broomsticks. Nights when Chloe, exhausted but radiant, would lean against him as the girls drifted to sleep in their arms. He began to document the small things: photos, scribbled notes, drawings the girls gave him. It wasn't to share with anyone. It was for him, to hold on to a life he had almost lost. One crisp October afternoon, Liam took Chloe and the girls to a harvest festival on the outskirts of town. There were hay rides, sticky toffee apples, and a corn maze the twins insisted on solving unassisted. He watched them run ahead, their laughter cutting through the wind like music. Chloe stood beside him, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her scarf tangled in her hair. He turned to her and realized he didn't want to wait anymore. Not out of fear, not out of guilt, but because everything in that moment felt right. That evening, after the girls were asleep in the back seat on the drive home, he carried them into the house one by one, tucking them in carefully, brushing their hair with a tenderness that no longer surprised him. Chloe waited outside on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes quiet but questioning. He said nothing at first. Instead, he took her hands, reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled out a small velvet box, not with the urgency of a man trying to fix the past, but with the quiet determination of someone ready to build a future. She didn't open it. She simply looked at him, her breath caught in her chest, tears welling without falling. "I'm not asking for yesterday back," he said. "I'm asking for tomorrow. Every single tomorrow you'll give me. Not just as the man who loves you, but as the father I wasn't, and the one I want to be." Chloe remained silent for a long time, the autumn breeze brushing her face, bringing both memories and possibilities. Then, finally, she opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring, nothing like the one he had given her years ago. That one had been expensive and cold, a symbol of control. This one felt real, something chosen with care, with humility. She took his hand and slid the ring onto her own finger. There was no dramatic yes, no whispered vows, just action, choice, trust. In the months that followed, they didn't rush into marriage. There were no grand announcements or parties. Instead, they focused on their family. Liam officially adopted Sophia and Olivia, and they chose for their last names to be hyphenated, not to erase anything, but to honor every part of who they were and where they came from. The girls began calling him Dad on their own one morning at breakfast. Liam had turned to answer and dropped his spoon, stunned. Chloe had simply smiled, her eyes wet, and reached across the table to take his hand. Later that year, they planted a tree in the backyard. A maple. Liam dug the hole while the girls danced around with watering cans. Chloe tied a ribbon around the trunk. It was their symbol, of growth, of seasons, of a change that took root slowly but with deep, quiet strength. And every year after, as the leaves turned red and gold again, they celebrated not the moment they met or the moment they separated, but the moment they all found their way back. A second beginning. A life earned, not given. A family, not despite what had been lost, but because of what they had chosen to build. Together. The unwritten pages. A lesson in earned love. As an author, I see the conclusion of this story not as a perfect resolution, but as a deeply earned one. It's a tale about the cost of silence, the weight of regret, and the strength it takes to grow beyond the past. Liam's journey wasn't just about becoming a father. It was about unlearning fear, choosing vulnerability, and finally understanding what love truly requires. Chloe's strength carried the heart of this family through its hardest years, and her decision to forgive was not a weakness, but a quiet act of courage. What moves me most is that none of their reunion was easy. It wasn't a fairy tale where pain is erased with a single apology. Instead, it was a slow rebuilding, moment by moment, choice by choice. The girls didn't know they were healing a man who never thought he deserved a second chance, but they did. In the end, this story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful kind of love is the one that arrives late, but stays. If this story touched your heart, share it, and leave a comment with your favorite moment. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will touch your heart.